Hello my good friends, welcome back to another video. Today we are looking at Aleksandr Dugin, who is the Nazbol guy, also known to pal around with Caleb Maupin, which is probably how most of you know him. Dugan is a out-and-out Russian fascist, although he wouldn't just call it Russian fascism, whether it's nationalism or some other interesting word salad that takes words that we already have meanings for and just flips it around so that it means Russian fascism. So I'm not going to go into a background of Dugan, that's very easy to Wikipedia, and I'm not going to explain his view of Eurasia or his geopolitical kind of view. There's a great channel called Strategy Stuff, whose video, The Strategy of Eurasianism, goes into the kind of world that Dugan would like. I recommend you go and check it out. It's very, very well done. The entire channel is. But alas, today we are looking at Dugan's essay, Fascism, Borderless, and Red. Yes, it conjures up all sorts of wonderful, wonderful imagery, doesn't it? Now, while I'm reading through this, I'm going to take a little page from Cass Iris. I probably mispronounced that. Wonderful channel. I'm sure you have seen it, but head on over if you haven't. So when I'm reading Dugan's work, the screen will look like this, and you will be able to hear this music. When I'm responding with my own thoughts, the screen will look like this, and you'll hear this music. Without further ado, let's get into what will be an incredible time for all involved. Fascism, Borderless and Red by Aleksandr Dugin. There are, in the 20th century, only three ideologies that have managed to demonstrate that their principles are realistic in terms of their political administrative implementation. These are liberalism, communism, and fascism. As much as one may like to, it is impossible to name another model of society which would not be one of the forms of these ideologies and which, at the same time, existed in reality. There are liberal countries, there are communist countries, and there are fascist or nationalist countries. Others are absent and are impossible. In Russia, we have passed two ideological stages, the communist and the liberal. What remains is fascism. Now, far be it from me to pretend that liberalism doesn't have any flaws, or that there are no substantive critiques of liberalism, or that communism as an ideology has no flaws. However, I do not think that, as Dugan says, what remains is fascism. Not sure that that adds up, but let's keep going and we'll see where we get to. 1. Against national capitalism. One of the versions of fascism which, it seems, Russian society is today ready, or almost ready to embrace, is national capitalism. It is almost beyond doubt that the project of national capitalism, or right fascism, constitutes an ideological initiative of that part of the elite of society which is seriously concerned with the problem of power, and feels acutely the power of time. Yet, the national capitalist right-wing variation of fascism does by no means exhaust the nature of this ideology. Moreover, the union of the national bourgeoisie with the intelligentsia on which, according to some analysts, the coming Russian fascism will be based, constitutes a glaring example of what actually is entirely alien to fascism as a worldview, as a doctrine, and as a style. Now, to me, the lay person, it seems as though he's merely describing an oligarchy where a small group of people control nearly all of, if not all of, the power in a country. But I don't think he can just say that because he has to tie it into liberalism, capitalism, and fascism as, ironically enough, some sort of progression from those first two into kind of a natural fascism or a natural Russian kind of fascism. The domination of national capital. This is a Marxist definition of the phenomenon of fascism. it does absolutely not take into account the specific philosophical self-reflection of fascist ideology and consciously ignores the fundamental core pathos of fascism. As a quick addendum here with some of these terms that old mate Dugan is throwing around, I should just point out that he is a huge esoteric occultist as well. Absolutely fascinated by that stuff. He was a esoteric occult Hitler dude way back. I recommend you go and read up about him because very funny. Fascism. This is nationalism, yet not any nationalism, but a revolutionary, rebellious, romantic, idealistic form of nationalism, appealing to a great myth and transcendental idea, trying to put into practice the impossible dream, to give birth to a society of the hero and Superman, to change and transform the world. Just going to take a really quick little interjection here to say that this, after reading this, it's what got me to make this video. Because this part, talking about a revolutionary, rebellious, romantic idealism, appealing to a great myth and a transcendental idea, this is what jumped out to me in identifying the power that fascism has, the narrative power that it can harness. And that, I think, is the really, really important thing to take from this. That people grab onto that romantic, rebellious, idealistic, great myth idea, and they can shape their lives around that narrative. That's why I read this and I went, I absolutely have to talk about this, because as much as I love the whole Umberto Eco, 14 points of fascism, etc., very bread tube, I think this is what gets to the crux of what is appealing about nationalism and, ultimately, fascism. On the economic level, fascism is characterized rather by socialist or moderately socialist methods, which subordinate personal, individual economic interests to the principles of national welfare, justice, and brotherhood. And here I think is why it's important that as leftists, we have more of an intersectional view and we're not class reductionists, because otherwise what can tend to happen is that you see someone like Dugan who is promoting socialist economic ideas, Caleb Maupin, and you jump on board with it because that's the only thing that you're thinking about. A very, very dangerous game to play. And finally, the fascist view of culture corresponds to a radical rejection of the humanistic, excessively humane mentality, i.e. of what represents the essence of the intelligentsia. The fascist hates the intellectual as a type. He sees in him a masked bourgeois, a pretentious Philistine, a chatterbox and irresponsible coward. The fascist loves the brutal, superhuman and angel-like at the same time. He loves the cold and tragedy. He does not like warmth and comfort. With other words, fascism despises everything that makes up the essence of national capitalism. When I'm reading this, I realise how important it is to try and avoid the real depths of cynicism that some leftists succumb to, because the world can be, a pretty terrible place at times, and we look at the systems and we feel powerless. But it's things like this and people being mean or transgressive that feed into these kind of notions and that allow those kind of people and that energy to be swept up and utilized by people like Dugan, who are trying to pull all of that together and aim it somewhere that you really don't want to end up. He fights for the domination of national idealism and not national capital, and against the bourgeoisie and intelligentsia, and not for her and not with her. The fascist pathos is accurately defined in the famous phrase of Mussolini, "Rise, fascist and proletarian Italy." Fascist and proletarian, such is the orientation of fascism. It is a labour and heroic, militant and creative, idealistic and futuristic ideology which does not have anything in common with securing additional governmental comfort for the traders, even if 1,000 times national, and sinecures for the socially parasitic intelligentsia. The central figures of the fascist state and fascist myth are the peasant, worker, and soldier. peasant, the worker, and the soldier. Again, it's such powerful imagery, and anybody living in a nation state can attest to the fact that those three symbols are very powerful within founding myths, within kind of the myths of what a real, insert, it might be Australian is, you're a worker, you're a soldier, you're an Anzac, you're a veteran, or, peasants, the poor people that are doing the brunt of the work. And again, this is where that bleeds over into a leftist analysis. And those things can, again, be really powerful. On the top, as the supreme symbol of the tragic fight with destiny, cosmic entropy, is the godlike leader, Deus, Führer, superhuman, who realizes in his supra-individual personality the extraordinary tension of national will for feet. Of course, somewhere at the periphery, there is also a place for the honest citizen merchant and university professor. They too put on party badges and go out to ceremonial meetings. But in fascist reality, their figures are fading, getting lost, and move into the background. Not for them and not by them is the national revolution done. So here we have some kind of, everyman, populist, appeal to the masses, anti-elitism, anti-intellectualism that, you can use to rile up people that feel hard done by, legitimately hard done by. But again, where does this end? The answer is fascism. In history, clean, ideal fascism did not experience a direct incarnation. In practice, the urgent problems of assumption of power and establishing economic order forced the fascist leaders, including Mussolini, Hitler, Franco, as well as Salazar, to forge alliances with conservatives, national capitalists, big owners, and corporation heads. Yet, this compromise always ended deplorable for the fascist regimes. I have to say this is a pretty novel take on this phenomenon, because usually the analysis goes that conservatives and capitalists and captains of industry will form these ties and these coalitions with fascists because they believe that they're able to, keep them under their wing, keep them under control. And inevitably what ends up happening is that fascists just burst out from that and completely take over. But here, Dugan is saying the opposite is true, is that fascists just have never really been given a chance, to just let it rip and just to see where pure fascism can really take us. The fanatic anti-communism of Hitler, warmed up by the German capitalists, cost Germany the defeat in its war with the USSR, while Mussolini, trusting into the honesty of the king, articulator of the interests exactly of big business, was delivered by him to the renegades Badoglio and Ciano, who put the Jews into prison and threw themselves into the embrace of the Americans. Franco held out the longest, and even that because of the concessions of liberal capitalist England and USA, and because of his rejection to support the ideologically related regimes of the Axis. Moreover, Franco was not a real fascist. National capitalism is the inner virus of fascism, its enemy and guarantor of its degeneration and perishing. National capitalism is in no way an essential characteristic of fascism, as national capitalism is, on the contrary, an accidental and contradictory element in its inner structure. Therefore, in our case, in the case of the growing Russian national capitalism, one cannot speak about fascism, but of an attempt to preliminarily pervert what is not to be circumvented. Such pseudo-fascism can be called preventative or precautionary. It hastens to make itself known before an authentic, real, radically revolutionary and consistent fascism, a fascist fascism. A fascist fascism. You know that saying, a man amongst men? Dugan truly is a fascist amongst fascists. A fascist fascism is, in full measure, born and become strong in Russia. National capitalists, these are former Communist Party leaders who were used to boss around and humiliate the people, and who subsequently, out of conformism, became liberal Democrats, and who, now that this stage is over, are, equally zealously, venturing to cover themselves with national clothes. Having democracy transformed into a farce, apparently, The partocrats, together with the obliging intelligentsia, are decidedly up to foul and poison the nationalism that is advancing into society. I suppose I don't have too much to add to this. I'm sure everybody can, clearly see for themselves this kind of reactionary, anti-elitist sentiment that is being peddled here that, holds sway amongst the populist left as well as the right. The nature of fascism is a new hierarchy, a new aristocracy. The novelty lies in that the hierarchy is based on natural, organic, and clear principles: dignity, honour, courage, and heroism. The dilapidated hierarchy, which is trying to carry itself over into the era of nationalism, is, as before, based on conformist abilities: flexibility, caution, a taste for intrigues, toadyism, etc. The obvious conflict between two styles, two human types, two normative systems is inescapable. So this part, I think, is very interesting. So he's dealing, obviously, with different ontological worldviews and identifying that currently, liberalism is the ontological view that is in favour by the broader society, even in Russia. And what he wants is a different view, one that he thinks has clear, natural, organic principles. However, I would argue that this is much like Michael Brooks says, trying to mythologize the past rather than historicizing it, looking back to perhaps a type of person, an aristocrat, that was assigning them certain values and then acting as though those values are naturally at the top of some kind of hierarchy, rather than being able to identify the historical manner in which those values came about. And to me, this is Dugan's main objective. All of the other things, I think, fall into line naturally after you change everybody's ontological view to this. Because after you do that, then everything does just seem natural. Much like capitalist realism argues that, it's harder to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. That is because the ontological worldview currently is a capitalist one. And if you can change that underlying notion of how the world operates, then it becomes incredibly difficult to have any other outcome except the one that logically follows from this, which is, of course, fascist fascism. 2. Russian socialism. It is absolutely unjustified to call fascism an extremely right-wing ideology. This phenomenon is much more precisely characterized with the paradoxical formula conservative revolution. It is a combination of a right-wing cultural political orientation, traditionalism, faithfulness to the soil, roots, national ethics, with a left-wing economic program, social justice, limitation to the market forces, deliverance from credit slavery, prohibition of stock market speculation, monopolies and trusts, and primacy of honest work. So it's here I want to go off on a bit of a tangent, because for anyone that's spent a bit of time on BreadTube, this might sound familiar. There's currently some young guys that are spouting exactly this, and they just happen to be friends of Caleb Maupin. He pals around with them. Who are they?
On social issues, that's what most people care most about. I'm just not that passionate. So I probably align more with conservative people on those sorts of things.
Yes, that's interesting. I wonder what his co-host has to say.
So we used to have this, and now we have this. This motherfucker looked like he's wearing a diaper. You need to show heroic idealizations. Can I say some shit? I guess I have reactionary views. You know what, guys? In a sense, I am a conservative or whatever. No more pregnancy. They're gonna graze a kid in a pod, just like in Death Stranding. Those people are a fucking tiny minority. They're 1 or 2%. Everyone else is conforming to normal roles. So stop going against the fucking majority if you're a communist for no fucking reason, antagonizing the people. You're gonna make the Communist Party poster a cuck being helped up? A man's duty is to protect a woman. Political correctness is the rule of soy.
Now, I'm not trying to cancel anyone, but I just want to point out that I think Dugan is correct in more ways than one when he says that it's not as simple as a left-right divide. In analogy to National Socialism, which was often called simply German socialism, one can speak of Russian fascism as Russian socialism. The ethnic specification of the term socialism has, in this context, a special meaning. What is meant is formulation of a socio-economic doctrine from the beginning, not on the basis of abstract dogmas and rationalistic laws, but on the basis of concrete, spiritual, ethical, and cultural principles that have organically formed the nation as such. Russian socialism, that is, not Russians for socialism, but socialism for the Russians. In distinction to rigid Marxist-Leninist dogmas, Russian National Socialism proceeds from an understanding of social justice which is characteristic exactly for our nation, for our historical tradition, for our economic ethics. Such a socialism will be more rural than proletarian, more communal and cooperative than administrative, more regionalistic than centralistic. All these are requirements of Russian national specificity which will find its expression in the doctrine and not only in practice. 3. New people. Such a Russian socialism should be built by new people, a new type of people, a new class, a class of heroes and revolutionaries. The remains of the party nomenclature and their ramshackle order should fall victim to the socialist revolution, the Russian national revolution. The Russians are longing for freshness, for modernity, for unfeigned romanticism, for living participation in some great cause. Everything that they are offered today is either archaic, the national patriots, or boring and cynical, the liberals. The dance and the attack, fashion and aggression, excessiveness and discipline, will and gesture, fanaticism and irony will seethe in the national revolutionaries. Young, malicious, merry, fearless, passionate and not knowing limits. They will build and destroy, rule and fulfill orders, conduct purges of the enemies of the nation and tenderly take care of Russian elderly and children. Wrathfully and merrily will they approach the citadel of the ramshackle and rotten system. Yes, they deeply thirst for power. They know how to use it. They will breathe life in society. They will shove the people into the sweet process of creating history. New people. Finally, intelligent and brave. Such as are needed. Who take the outer world as a strike. Immediately before his death, the French fascist writer Robert Brasillach voiced a strange prophecy. I see how in the East, in Russia, fascism is rising. A fascism borderless and red. Note, not a faded, brownish, pinkish national capitalism, but the blinding dawn of a new Russian revolution. Fascism, borderless as our lands and red as our blood. So, what do we think of this overall? Is it different than other fascism that you've seen? I feel like it is. That's why I felt the need to make this video, because it seems like it's a slimier form of fascism. It's not appealing to the general kind of liberal populism, but I feel as though it's appealing to the populism of those people with actual critiques of both liberalism and of capitalism. And I feel that that is not an accident. I feel like this is the next step in fascism. Now, relating specifically to Caleb Maupin, I am also not trying to smear him with the Dugan brush, the Nazbol brush. I will say that it is interesting to me, having read his entire BreadTube book and seeing him talk, that he does espouse many of the same kinds of things that, if not the same as Dugan, put him in a similar position. And also, I feel, put him in a position to be manipulated by Dugan and by this kind of fascism. Because we see that Jackson Hinkle and Has, they are those kind of people that can definitely fall into this. And you just have to go and watch them defending Putin's invasion of Ukraine to see where this kind of thing can land. And in saying that, I want to play this clip of Maupin addressing Dugan.
Dugan, right? Dugan has his view, fourth political theory, Eurasianism. That's his viewpoint. Obviously not my viewpoint. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I believe in historical progress, etc. But he's a very important Russian intellectual, very influential. A lot of people in Russia read his words. A lot of people in Russia strongly disagree with him, but a lot of people do read what he has to say. Why would I not, as an intellectual, as an anti-imperialist in the West, why would I not want the opportunity to engage with him? And why would I not, seek that opportunity out? It's just like common sense if you're in the real world trying to get things done. Now, if you're on the internet trying to prove you're the most glorious and most pure leftist, maybe not.
So that about wraps it up. From me here, the most glorious and pure leftist, I want to thank you if you've reached this point. It's been pretty painful having to go through all of that fascism. I want to give a shout out to my patrons who are on the screen now. Thank you so much. If you're interested in supporting the channel, head on over, check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/onlydog on the left. Apart from that, I hope you have a great night. See ya.